This year, our province celebrates its 100th anniversary. And we look back at that history, that 100 plus years of Passionist presence in Australia, in New Zealand, Papua New Guinea and Vietnam in Thanksgiving. In particular, though, we look at the houses, the centres for many of us of our charism, where we first came into contact with our charism. And we begin by looking at our provincial house of St. Brigid's in Marrickville, New South Wales.
Well, the Passionist party of 6 religious, led by Father Alphonsus O'Neill, arrived in Australia and in Marrickville on November the 21st in 1887. The church was already built when we arrived and opened on Christmas Day in 1886. The community, those first 5, grew very quickly, so a new house was built just a little bit up from the church in Des Point Street. 5 years after the arrival, when this new house was built, the house held 13 priests, 2 deacons and 5 students for the priesthood. Marrickville municipality began to grow significantly between 1903 and 1911. And so in 1911, the church was no longer large enough for the congregation. And so a new property was bought. In 1911, 1912, a second Father Alphonsus, this time Father Alphonsus Cohen, was appointed the superior here, and he was responsible for extending the house and beginning the monastery. The church itself, the foundation stone, was laid in 1918. It was built to be a national shrine for the Passion. Over the years, St. Brigid has been the community house for us. It was the first house of formation and novitiate. It was for most of all of these years, it has been the provincial headquarters, and of course it's been the parish centre and the parish offices. It's been also the residence of generations of missioners and retreat givers who in those very early years went by horse, by buggy, by steam train, all over Australia and New Zealand, preaching. Even in 1892, they were already going out right across Australia as missioners and making a name for themselves. Education has always also been a continuous mission here at St. Brigid's for 135 years now. Our present schools were built by the famed Father Casimir. In their day, they were the most up-to-date and modern educational buildings in the whole of the Southern Hemisphere. What's held together the incredibly rich story of St. Brigid's, both of the community and of the parish, has been the number of our religious who have lived and worked here for great lengths of time in the community. Our community here at present continues to be a residence for many of our older religious who are retired or semi-retired, for our religious who are on active ministries. It's also the residence, of course, of our parish team and the residence for those working in the provincial office. I hope we will continue to use these premises for mission, for our Passionist congregation and for the church in this parish, and also to develop our facilities here so that they might generate income to continue our presence and mission in Australia and throughout our province, wherever we may be.
We have an early history here, beginning with our foundation in 1896. And that first period, up until about 1922, saw the Passionists re-establish themselves in South Australia. They'd been here earlier from Stradbroke Island, but there had been a discontinuity and there'd been a break. Thanks to Mary MacKillop's intervention in Rome, some years later the Passionists returned to Australia. Not long after that return they moved to Adelaide, as I said, in 1896. Up until 1922, Passionists from the monastery site here, in the old monastery behind me, which is now a garden, worked in the local church principally. They inherited the care of two existing parishes, Morford Vale Parish and Parkside Parish. They ministered there, and they established three others. And their Passionist spirituality was obvious in the choices of names they chose for those parishes. Our Lady of Sorrows, Holy Cross Parish, and St. Paul of the Cross Parish. This work and ministry continued until around the beginnings of our province, 1922, when they were asked by our general in Rome to return to the monastery to live the more cloistered life. Over the next few years, they withdrew from all of the parishes they had been caring for. Passionists lived here in the monastery and committed to building the monastery that we now have, which was completed in 1926. At the same time, they built the monastery church, finishing that project in 1925. In that period of time, the Passionists were mostly doing mission work, preaching work, and work within the monastery confines, confessing, etc. In the 1950s, mid-1950s, we began construction of and built our retreat house in the same style of the existing monastery. Retreat house had about 40 rooms. The Passionists also were asked by the Archdiocese in the 1950s to begin a parish in this geographical area. And again, they called the parish of St. Paul of the Cross. So the Archdiocese of Adelaide has two parishes called St. Paul of the Cross. From the late 1950s till today, we have maintained both the retreat house and our parish work. However, in those years, taking us through to about 2000, we've seen many changes, many developments within the retreat house, and for a period of time, its exclusive use to house refugees in a project founded by Father Jeff Foll called the Monastery Refugee Project. And some thousands and thousands of refugees were introduced into life in Australia. In the year 2000, the Passionists renovated the monastery for a smaller community and renovated the retreat house. In those same years, we began work as an international novitiate community and became a much more multicultural community. When I arrived in Adelaide, there were 6 nationalities of Passionists working together in the community. Today, St. Paul's is home also to the Memorial Garden, the Sacred Garden. We work as a local community. We are engaged in the Archdiocese. We have continued our parish. We've continued our retreat centre work, and we hope to give witness to the memory of the Passion in everything we do.
The Apostolic Delegate here in Australia approached the Passionists in Australia about taking a foreign mission. The provincial at the time was Pascal Sweeney. They then looked at where they would go. The Franciscans heard about it and immediately offered half of their mission area to the Passionists, that is the area of Vonimo on the border with Indonesia. The first ones to go were sent by Father Xavier Bates, who was the provincial. And of them, 2 of them were in lay and 2 of them went to Madang. They did this for a couple of years, and then in 61 they moved to Vonimo, and they knew that they needed help because our numbers were very small. And then they started to look for lay missionaries. At one stage in Vonimo, there were 5 religious and 20 lay people running the church. So really and truly, the lay people really started the church in Vonimo area with the support of the few Passionists we had. The mission moved slowly, but education and health were the 2 main issues. And the Passionists started many schools and many small aid posts. It was difficult, and most of us had to write to our families and ask for money so we could send the kids to high school. And it worked, because in the end, the kids we trained and paid for, they got jobs and started paying for others to go to high school. So the system started. James Coucher tried to do something for them in the way of cattle, raising cattle for money. Brother Martin, he started training carpenters. Stan Tyler, he started tank making. The Centre Blong helped him, which James Coucher started to look after handicapped kids and adults. And it's done a great amount of work. After a long period of time, we started to do something about faith. They saw us, they saw what we were doing, then the church started to grow, a real church. We finished up by having students at the seminary in Moresby, therefore we had to have a house. Fortunately, under Kevin Hennessy, we bought a house right next to the parish house in St Joseph's in Barocco. And the bishop at that time, a Franciscan, he gave the Passionist St Joseph's Barocco. And we have been there and we've seen the parish grow and grow and grow. That's how we are now. We're mainly in Vonimo, and we've got Barocco, which is the biggest parish in the country. And it goes to think, if you give the people service, the people will always respond. And that's happened because all of the priests we've had in Barocco have been great in service to the people. And they respond. That's where we are now. Where we'll be in a few years, that's up to Almighty God. But knowing Melanesia as I do, the Passionists will be in Papua New Guinea for many centuries to come.
So the history of the fort, before the Passionists got here, is that there was a man by the name of Coxon. He was a veteran of the Boer War, and he was also in the British Indian Army. He was taking a boat ride up the Brisbane River up through to Ipswich, and as he was negotiating it, he looked up at this land formation up here, and it reminded him of a fort that he actually served in India. And so he bought the land in 1873, and he built a house on it, and he called it the fort. It was then bought by a Mr. Corcoran in about 1906, and then he and his family moved in here, and they lived here until the Passionists bought it from them in 1955. The Passionists came here because it was a time of expansion for the congregation. We were starting to develop places in different parts of Australia, and so, well, Brisbane was a natural progression of that, but also it was because we had a mission in Papua New Guinea, and this would form like a halfway point. I mean, at the time, the name of the place was already associated with the fort, and because of that, one of our fellows who early days moved in here, he heard that there was a fort, an old fort near the mouth of the Brisbane River, a place called Lytton, and it was shutting down. So he picked up a couple of ex-cannons from that place, and he established two here on the property. And as a result, people around thought that the place was called the fort because this was apparent, they thought it was an old fort that had been built to stop the Russians going up the river. Our work has always really been itinerant. You know, we were formed to do things like parish missions and retreats. So this place was set up probably with the vision of Paul of the Cross in mind. It's close to the city, so that it's close to where we do our work, but it's in a bush setting so that we can retreat to it and live out the contemplative part of our charism. The works that developed then were primarily our parish missions, retreats. We also, very much from the early days, became chaplains to the Canossian sisters. They came here and established the hospital of Canossa around 1960. And because of that, they did it because they wanted the Passionists to be their chaplains, and we've been their chaplains since then. As time went on, when the Passionist family group movement really took off here in Brisbane, that became the major ministry of our fellows from here. Of course, there was always a mass-going community. We got permission from the bishop to have a public mass, so that public mass was here almost since the beginning. Back in the year 2000, the Passionist Youth Retreat Team started here, and that became also a major ministry from this place. Oh, it's a wonderful place to live, this community, for a number of reasons. One is just the beautiful bush setting, and I would consider our view to be probably the second best view in Brisbane after Mount Cootha. So it's a place that is precisely quiet, a place that is contemplative. Also, it's a great place in terms of what then we can offer now. I mean, the Passionist Youth Retreat Team, obviously, they've had their formation days here. The work of the family group movement, for the Fort community that come here, they've really taken ownership of the place. The grounds are maintained by their voluntary efforts. It enables us to live here, but it's also enabled the Fort community to make it their home.
The church was built in 1841. It was designed and built by the convicts of the time. And the church was consecrated at the Christmas Eve Mass in 1841 by Father Terry. And every time we celebrate Christmas, we not only celebrate the birth of Jesus, but we also celebrate the birth of St. Joseph's Church. In 1843, the building behind the church was built, and that was the old presbytery. In 1844, Bishop Robert Wilson was installed as the first bishop of Hobart Archdiocese. And it is very significant that St. Joseph's Church was the pro-cathedral before the completion of St. Mary's Cathedral, the present one, in 1883. St. Joseph's Church is known for its beauty, the architecture, the paintings, the stained glass windows. And it's very interesting that one of our Passionist brothers, Brother Nick, he has done a great woodcraft work in the church, and many people admire his work. The building behind the church was the presbytery, and this presbytery was turned into a convent in 1846 when Sisters of Charity arrived. Sisters of Charity focused in taking care of the disadvantaged children and women, and their main focus was on education, providing education, housing and health care to the underprivileged. In 1956, the Passionists were invited by Archbishop Guilford Young to enable St. Joseph to be a center of worship and sacraments in the heart of the Hobart city. Part of the ministry included weekend retreats for men in what was the convent of Sisters of Charity. And then when Passionists arrived, the sisters moved to Sandy Bay, a nearby area. Since that time, Passionist religious community has been involved in pastoral care of the Battery Point area of Hobart City. And other significant ministries of Passionist was to provide a spiritual care to those who were sick in the Royal Hobart Hospital. And we also respond to the calls from Hobart Private Hospital and few nursing homes around the church. Now, in the year 1990, Bishop Eric Darcy invited Father Chris Smithen to help in refugee settlement program. And people from El Salvador, Bosnia, Eastern Europe, Sudan, Vietnam and Cambodia are some of them who benefited from this refugee program. Passionists have been here in Hobart over 70 years. There's a totally a different congregation or different dynamism. This extends our ministry to different people from different cultural background. We are so grateful to all the Passionists who has gone before, because it is they who built this community, and along with them there's so many other people who have made our charism so meaningful in this beautiful place.
The English province of the Passionists founded a community and a small retreat house which was established in Hamilton in the North Island of New Zealand. That was done in the 26th of June, 1960. When the English Passionists were unable to provide extra men for this foundation, it was then transferred to Australia in 1966. And the retreat house in Hamilton was the principal ministry for the Passionists in New Zealand between 1960 and 1988. The Passionists who were living in Hamilton, and we also had students, I was one, Greg Light, I know was another, of people who were conducting parish missions, adult and youth retreats throughout the country during that other time. Now, in 1988, a decision by the Provincial Council at the time took the decision to close the house in Hamilton. However, amazingly, in that same week, the Passionist Family Group movement was launched in Papua and then East Coast Bays a week later. That may seem trivial in one sense, but we're going to see between 1988 and 1996, 100 parishes were established. It was a period of real growth and boom, in other words. One has to only look at the number of regional parish coordinators and parish formations and youth and adult ministries, parish missions, the depth of this work that has contributed to the faith life of New Zealand. And it's encouraged so many people to find their gift and to share that gift with others. In 2017, a national team was developed with John and Mary Ellen Lean and Paul and Linda Derbyshire. That 5-year commitment finished in June 21. And following that was the appointment of a national coordinator, which I was happy to accept. So we can see that there's been lots and lots of changes, lots of developments. We've seen the companions grow. We've got a very strong companions group in Auckland. We've got another companions group in Hawke's Bay, another in New Plymouth and Christchurch. So there's quite a few of these. These are people who want to depth themselves into a richer understanding of Passionist spirituality and what it is to be a Passionist. So all these things, we're walking a road of seeing the memory of the Passion alive and well here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We can see that the Holy Spirit province, as we know it, with these 4 countries have come together, different cultures, different backgrounds, where we try to understand the passion of Jesus in 2022, what it calls us to be. We're connecting life and faith, and we're living the Passionist charism, and we're sharing in the work and ministry of making the memory of Jesus alive.
The Holy Cross officially opened in May 1968, but there were men living here as the building was being finished for about 18 months before that. If you go back just a few more years earlier than that, a lot of the religious orders were establishing seminaries for the formation of their students, around what was called the Seminary Belt, which included, not far from here, the Blessed Sacraments. The Passionists had difficulty getting a foundation here in Melbourne, but once that was approved and Holy Cross was built, we had a large number of students from the beginning in 1968, and the thought was maybe this building, which at that stage was housing just over 70 members, might be duplicated into a cloister in the middle of another section. But of course, that was the peak years of vocations and started to decline after that. I suppose there have been a few developments since then. About year 2000 or late 90s, we were looking at the number of students had declined significantly, and was it possible to use the facility as a retreat and conference centre. So gradually we introduced that, and then by moving the remaining students, about 7 or 8 of them, all into the one corridor with the senior members, we were able to devote what had been all the original residence area for students into accommodation, turned over all the conference rooms that are now there, which had been libraries and such things. So it's been running now as a retreat centre since about the mid-1990s. Right from the beginning, we used to have a monthly mass. It was called a folk mass in the early days because guitar music was used. A lot of the students were good guitarists and singers, so it was quite a lively end of the month mass. A lot of people used to come just for that 1 month. We were able to make an oval out here with the help of all the development that went on in the area. It changed massively from an area of orchards to what one person called from orchards to ostentation, very big mansions on minimum of 1 acre blocks. So we were able to benefit from all the building that was going on around by using the fill to create an oval, which is now a very popular attraction for groups who come here to make retreats. Things have changed obviously over the years, but we're still a very active presence. Our community is renowned, I think, for its hospitality and welcome. So we like to think that that's an extension of our charism, and that as long as we can remain here, we all hope to keep reaching out and sharing our charism.
In 1995, our province held its very first open chapter, and there was a desire at this chapter for a renewal of our community life. In order to achieve this, it was decided that we needed to downsize in some parts of our province in order that we might grow in others, in particular places where we could have a renewed sense of community life. So the chapter tasked the provincial and council with finding 2 new places that we could minister in Australia. One of those would be here in Melbourne. Some of the prerequisites to this place here in Melbourne would be that it would be an under-resourced parish, but that also it would be a parish big enough to sustain a community of 3 or 4 of our men so that we might minister as well as have that required community life. After discussions were had with the Archdiocese of Melbourne, it was decided that Endeavour Hills, St Paul Apostle, was such an appropriate parish. The parish had a house, but obviously that house was not big enough to accommodate 3 or 4 of our men and all their needs. And so we purchased the house next to the parish house, and that became St Gabriel's Retreat at Endeavour Hills. Since arriving here nearly 25 years ago, the parish has flourished under the many different Passionist parish priests that it has had. But in particular, John Pierce and Tim O'Toole, who are both still very fondly remembered here in our parish. We've also been very lucky to have the Sisters of the Cross and Passion who have assisted the parish in its work, but also giving it a very Passionist atmosphere. We have seen the growth of both the Passionist family group movement, where we have 2 family groups here in our parish, but also the Passionist companions who meet here regularly to explore the Passionist charism in a deeper way. Not only do our Passionist community members work here in the parish, but we're also involved in many other different ministries around the area as well. From lecturing at Yarra Theological Union to retreat giving, adult faith formation, as well as supervision and spiritual direction. The two houses that we live in, which are two simple houses side by side, lend themselves to a very close community. And so if we look back on that decision back in 1995 to come here in order to renew community life, I think not only have we been successful in that, but we've also been successful in promoting the charism of St. Paul of the Cross and keeping alive the memory of the Passion here in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne.
In 2005, the Superior General of the Passionists founded a mission in Vietnam. As that mission grew, it began to be obvious that it needed help from a province such as ours. So in 2015, finally, that too became part of the province. Vietnam is a precious, key part of the province. Our strength is building in Vietnam. It's subject to all kinds of dangers or challenges because it's young. But the hope is for something truly great. And it has been a great blessing. And we hope and pray that the result will be everything we hope for.
Our Passionist charism has taken on many different forms over the last 100 plus years, here in Australia, in New Zealand, in Papua New Guinea and in Vietnam. This gives us hope when we look to our future that things might look different, but the Passionist charism will live on. It will live on in the hearts of all those who call themselves Passionist. It will live on in the hearts of all those who consider themselves to be followers of St. Paul of the Cross.